The German panzer commander couldn't believe his eyes. Through the smoke and chaos of the Ardennes forest, something impossible was happening. A tiny fabric-covered observation plane, barely larger than a child's toy, was diving toward his 30-ton steel fortress. Then came the whoosh, the explosion, the screaming of metal. When the smoke cleared, his tank was burning, and the little plane was already gone, buzzing away like an angry hornet. The Americans had done the unthinkable. They'd turned their slowest, most vulnerable aircraft into tank killers, and the man behind it, a mild-mannered history teacher from Illinois who would become the most feared pilot the Panzers never saw coming. The autumn rain of 1944 fell in sheets across the French countryside, turning the roads into rivers of mud and the fields into quagmires that swallowed jeeps whole. Major Charles Bazooka Charlie Carpenter stood beside his L4 Grasshopper, a military version of the civilian Piper Cub, watching mechanics patch bullet holes in the fabric wings with the same resignation a tailor might show mending a threadbare coat. The plane looked like it had been built in someone's garage, because, essentially, it had been. Fabric stretched over a steel tube frame, powered by a 65-horsepower engine that couldn't outrun a decent automobile. It was never meant for combat. Before the war, Carpenter had been a high school history teacher in Moline, Illinois, standing before blackboards, explaining the tactics of Napoleon and Caesar to teenagers who dreamed of anywhere but there. Now, at 42 years old, he was living history instead of teaching it, assigned to the 4th Armored Division as an artillery spotter. His job was simple, unglamorous, and vital. Fly low and slow over enemy positions, radio back coordinates, then get out before German flak turned his canvas bird into confetti. But simplicity had become impossibility. The German Wehrmacht had adapted. They'd learned that American artillery spotters were the eyes of the beast, and they'd begun hunting the grasshoppers with a vengeance. Anti-aircraft guns tracked the slow-moving planes with ease. Messerschmitt fighters dove on them like hawks on field mice. In the first 3 months of the European campaign, the army had lost 47 observation aircraft, a staggering 23% casualty rate that made artillery spotting one of the most dangerous jobs in the entire theater. "They're picking us off like ducks in a shooting gallery," Lieutenant James Morrison said, lighting a cigarette with shaking hands. Morrison had watched his wingman's plane disintegrate over St. Lo 2 weeks earlier, hit by an 88mm shell that left nothing but falling debris and a smear of smoke. "We can't fight back. We can't run. We're just targets." Carpenter didn't respond immediately. He was staring at a burned-out German Panzer IV on the ridge above them, its turret blown clean off by a direct artillery hit. The tank had been part of a column that had nearly broken through American lines 3 days earlier, killing 17 GIs before the artillery had finally ranged in. 17 men dead, because it had taken Carpenter 12 minutes to spot the tanks, radio coordinates, and wait for the guns to adjust their fire. 12 minutes, an eternity in combat. "What if we didn't have to run?" Carpenter said quietly. Morrison looked at him like he'd suggested flying to Berlin and challenging Hitler to a fistfight. "Sir, what if we could fight back?" Carpenter walked toward the Panzer, his boots squelching in the mud. "These tanks are what's killing our boys. The 88s, the Panthers, the Tigers, they're breaking our advances, ambushing our columns. We spot them, we call it in, and by the time the artillery responds, they've moved or our guys are already dead." He ran his hand along the scorched armor of the destroyed tank. Even dead, it was intimidating, a 30-ton monster designed to dominate the battlefield. The German Panzerwaffe had terrified Allied forces since 1940, their tanks superior in armor and firepower to almost anything the Americans fielded. A single Tiger tank could hold up an entire infantry battalion. A Panther could destroy 3 Shermans before they got close enough to penetrate its frontal armor. "The Bazooka boys get them sometimes," Morrison offered, "when they can get close enough." "Exactly," Carpenter said, turning back to his grasshopper, "when they can get close enough. But what if we brought the bazooka to them?" The idea was insane. The M9 Bazooka was a 60-inch tube that fired a 3.5-pound rocket capable of penetrating 4 inches of armor at close range. It was designed to be shoulder-fired by infantry, not mounted on an aircraft that could barely carry its pilot and a full tank of gas. The recoil alone could tear the wings off a grasshopper. The weight would make it unflyable. The rockets were notoriously inaccurate beyond 50 yards, but Carpenter couldn't shake the image from his mind. Diving on a Panzer from above, where its armor was thinnest, firing a rocket straight down through the engine deck or turret roof. The Germans would never expect it. They'd trained their crews to watch for ground threats, not aerial ones from slow observation planes. It would be the ultimate sucker punch. "Sir, with all respect, that's crazy," Morrison said. "The brass would never approve it. The weight calculations alone." "Then we don't ask for approval," Carpenter interrupted. "We test it. We prove it works. Then we show them." Over the next 2 weeks, Carpenter became a man possessed. He spent his off hours in the maintenance depot, sketching designs on scraps of paper, measuring and remeasuring the Grasshopper's load capacity. The L4 had a maximum takeoff weight of 1,220 pounds. Carpenter weighed 165. A full fuel load was 108 pounds. That left roughly 950 pounds for equipment and weapons. A bazooka weighed 15 pounds. 6 rockets added another 21 pounds. Theoretically possible. The real problem was mounting. The bazooka couldn't be fired from inside the cramped cockpit. The backblast would incinerate the pilot. It had to be mounted externally, on the wing struts, angled slightly downward for diving attacks. Carpenter recruited Sergeant Laverne "Frenchy" Dugas, a mechanic from Louisiana who could fabricate anything from spare parts and wire. "You want me to do what now?" Frenchy said, squinting at Carpenter's crude sketches. "Mount 3 bazookas on each wing. Rig them to fire electrically from the cockpit. Make sure they're angled down about 15 degrees. Frenchy scratched his head, then grinned. "Major, you're either gonna be a hero or a grease spot. Let's find out which." They worked in secret, using salvaged materials and borrowed tools. The bazookas were mounted in crude metal brackets, welded to the wing struts. Electrical wiring ran from the cockpit to improvised firing mechanisms, essentially modified solenoids that would strike the rocket primers when Carpenter pressed a button. It was crude, dangerous, and completely unauthorized. The first test nearly killed him. Carpenter took off at dawn on October 15th, 1944, with 2 bazookas mounted and loaded. The extra weight made the Grasshopper sluggish, the controls mushy. He climbed to 500 feet over an empty field where they'd placed a burned-out truck as a target. His hands were sweating inside his gloves. He nosed the plane into a shallow dive, lined up the truck in his improvised sight, a grease pencil mark on the windscreen, and pressed the firing button. The rocket ignited with a sound like tearing canvas. The Grasshopper lurched violently to the left as the asymmetric thrust tried to flip it over. Carpenter fought the controls, his heart hammering, barely keeping the wings level. The rocket streaked downward, missing the truck by 40 yards and exploding harmlessly in the mud. He landed shaking, his shirt soaked with sweat. Morrison and Frenchy ran to the plane. "Jesus Christ, sir, I thought you were going in," Morrison shouted. Carpenter climbed out, his legs unsteady. "The recoil, we need to fire them in pairs, symmetrically, balance the thrust." "Or you could admit this is suicide," Morrison said. Carpenter looked at him with the same expression he'd once used on students who claimed they couldn't learn calculus. "We're adjusting the variables, that's all. Science." They modified the firing system to trigger both wing-mounted rockets simultaneously. The second test went better. The Grasshopper stayed level, and 1 rocket hit within 10 yards of the target. The third test, Carpenter put a rocket through the truck's engine block. By the 4th test, he was hitting man-sized targets from 300 feet. Word spread through the division. Pilots came to watch the crazy major who'd turned his Grasshopper into a gunship. Some laughed, others were intrigued. The commanding officer of the 4th Armored Division, Major General Hugh Gaffey, heard rumors and came to investigate. "Major Carpenter," Gaffey said, watching the modified plane with a mixture of horror and fascination, "what in God's name have you done to that aircraft?" "Made it useful, sir," Carpenter replied. "Permission to demonstrate?" Gaffey was a tanker himself, a man who understood the terror his crews felt facing German armor. He'd lost too many Shermans to Panzers, too many boys burned alive in steel coffins. "Show me," he said. Carpenter took off, circled once, then dove on the target truck. Both rockets fired simultaneously, streaking downward in parallel trails of smoke. Both hit. The truck exploded in a satisfying fireball. Carpenter climbed away, waggled his wings, and landed. Gaffey was silent for a long moment. Then he smiled, a rare expression on the general's weathered face. "Major, you're either going to win a medal or a court-martial. Possibly both. But if you can do that to a Panzer, I want every grasshopper in this division armed. Make it happen." Carpenter had his approval. Now came the hard part, proving it worked in combat against real tanks with real Germans shooting back. The schoolteacher's war was about to become very personal. The morning of October 20th, 1944, broke cold and grey over the Lorraine Plateau, the kind of weather that made men's bones ache and turned optimism into a luxury no one could afford. Major Charles Carpenter performed his pre-flight inspection with the methodical precision of a man who knew that overlooking a single loose bolt could mean the difference between landing and crashing. His L4 Grasshopper, now christened Rosie after his wife back in Illinois, sat on the muddy airstrip looking like a dragonfly that had wandered into a convention of eagles. 6 M9 bazookas jutted from the wing struts, 3 per side, loaded with high-explosive anti-tank rockets. The modification added 216 pounds to the aircraft's weight, pushing it to the absolute edge of its performance envelope. Takeoffs required every inch of available runway. Climbs were agonizingly slow. Maneuverability had been reduced to something resembling a pregnant cow trying to dance. But Carpenter had 6 shots at German armor, and that was 6 more than any other observation pilot in the European theater. "Weather's shit, sir," Sergeant Frenchy Dugas observed, handing Carpenter a thermos of coffee that tasted like it had been brewed in a boot. "Ceilings may be 800 feet, visibility 2 miles at best. Germans will hear you before they see you." "Good," Carpenter said, taking a sip and immediately regretting it. "Means I'll see them before they see me too. Low clouds are cover." Lieutenant Morrison approached, his face pale. "Sir, intelligence reports a Panzer column moving up the Nancy Road. At least 8 tanks, probably more. They're heading straight for the 37th Tank Battalion's position. Our boys are outnumbered and outgunned." Carpenter felt his stomach tighten. The 37th had already lost 11 Shermans in the past week. Their crews were exhausted, their tanks patched together with spare parts and prayers. A fresh Panzer column would roll through them like a harvester through wheat. "Radio the 37th, Carpenter said, climbing into Rosie's cockpit. "Tell them the Grasshopper's coming. Tell them to mark their positions with smoke. White smoke, not yellow. I don't want to hit our own guys." "Sir, you've never done this in combat," Morrison said quietly. "The test targets didn't shoot back." Carpenter strapped himself in, his hands moving through the startup sequence with practiced efficiency. "Then I guess we're about to find out if I'm as smart as I think I am or as dumb as you think I am." The engine coughed, sputtered, then caught with a rattling roar that sounded like a lawnmower with emphysema. Carpenter taxied to the end of the strip, ran through his final checks, and pushed the throttle forward. Rosie accelerated with all the urgency of a reluctant mule, the extra weight making every foot of runway precious. The trees at the far end grew larger. Carpenter pulled back on the stick. The wheels left the ground with perhaps 20 feet to spare, the Grasshopper clawing for altitude with the grace of a brick learning to fly. He climbed into the overcast at 500 feet, the world disappearing into grey nothingness. Moisture beaded on the windscreen. The compass became his only reference as he flew by instruments, heading northeast toward the Nancy Road. At 800 feet, He broke through the cloud deck into a world of diffused light and muffled sound. Below, the clouds formed a solid grey carpet. Somewhere beneath that carpet, German tanks were hunting American boys. Carpenter throttled back, descending carefully through a gap in the clouds. The ground appeared suddenly, a patchwork of brown fields, dark forests, and the black ribbon of the Nancy Road. And there, moving in a staggered column like iron beetles, were the Panzers. His breath caught. Intelligence had said 8 tanks. He counted 12. Panzer IVs mostly. Their long 75mm guns, capable of killing a Sherman at 1,500 yards. They were moving with the confidence of predators that had no natural enemies, their commanders standing in open hatches, scanning for ground threats. None of them were looking up. White smoke blossomed from a tree line 2 miles ahead, the 37th Tank Battalion's position. The Panzers were heading straight for them. Carpenter estimated 15 minutes until contact. 15 minutes until American boys started dying. He circled wide, staying in the clouds, his mind racing through calculations. The Panzers were moving at perhaps 15 miles per hour. Their top armor was 20mm thick, enough to stop small arms fire, but vulnerable to the bazooka's shaped charge. He needed to attack from directly above or slightly behind, where the engine deck was most vulnerable. He needed to dive fast enough to maintain accuracy, but slow enough to pull out before hitting the ground. He needed to fire both rockets simultaneously to maintain balance. He needed to not get killed. Simple, he muttered to himself. Just like shooting ducks, except the ducks are 30-ton steel monsters with machine guns. He selected his target, the lead Panzer, a command tank with extra antennas. Kill the leader, disrupt the formation. He nosed Rosie into a dive, dropping through the clouds like a stone. The Panzer grew in his windscreen. 600 feet, 500 feet. The commander was still standing in his hatch, looking forward, oblivious. 400 feet. Carpenter could see the German's face now, young, maybe 25. 300 feet. He centered the grease pencil mark on the Panzer's engine deck. He pressed the firing button. The rockets ignited with a double whoosh that shook the entire airframe. Twin trails of smoke streaked downward. The grasshopper lurched despite the balanced firing, the recoil like being punched by an invisible fist. Carpenter fought the controls, pulling out of the dive, his vision graying at the edges from the G-forces. Behind him, both rockets struck the Panzer within a second of each other. The first hit the engine deck, penetrating the thin armor and detonating inside the engine compartment. The second hit the turret roof, the shaped charge punching through and exploding among the ammunition stored inside. The Panzer erupted like a volcano, the turret lifting off its ring and flipping through the air. Flames shot 50 feet high. The commander never had time to scream. The other Panzers scattered like startled cattle, their commanders diving into their hatches, machine guns traversing wildly, searching for the threat. Carpenter was already climbing back into the clouds, his heart hammering so hard he thought it might break through his ribs. He'd done it. He'd actually done it. 1 shot, 1 kill, but he had 4 rockets left and 11 targets. He circled in the clouds, giving the Germans time to stop panicking and resume their advance. Confusion was his ally. They'd think it was artillery, a lucky hit. They wouldn't expect a second attack from the same impossible source. He waited 3 minutes, an eternity, then dove again. This time he targeted a Panzer near the rear of the column, hoping to trap the others between 2 burning wrecks. The dive was steeper, faster. The Panzer was moving, making the shot harder. He led the target like a hunter leading a running deer, pressed the button. The rockets fired. One hit the turret, the other missed by inches, exploding in the road beside the tank. But one was enough. The Panzer slewed sideways, smoke pouring from its hatches, then stopped. The crew bailed out, running for the tree line. Now the Germans knew something was hunting them. Machine gun fire filled the air, tracer rounds arcing upward in desperate patterns. A Panzer's main gun fired. The 75mm shell, passing close enough that Carpenter heard it, a sound like tearing fabric. He jinked left, then right, the grasshopper responding with all the agility of a shopping cart with a broken wheel. He climbed back into the clouds, breathing hard. 2 down, 2 rockets left, but the Germans were ready now, their guns tracking, their crews alert. The element of surprise was gone. He repositioned, approaching from a different angle. The panzer column had stopped, the tanks forming a defensive circle, standard procedure when under artillery attack. But this wasn't artillery. Carpenter dove from the north, the sun behind him, the oldest trick in the aviation playbook. He picked a Panzer on the circle's edge, dove, fired his last 2 rockets. One missed, the other hit the Panzer's side armor at an angle, the shaped charge failing to penetrate. The rocket exploded against the steel, scorching the paint, but the tank was undamaged. Carpenter cursed, pulling out of the dive. He was out of ammunition and he'd just pissed off 11 very angry Germans. Machine gun fire followed him into the clouds, bullets punching through Rosie's fabric skin like needles through cloth. Carpenter felt the plane shudder, heard the engine miss a beat, then catch again. He didn't look back. He flew straight and level, heading for home, his hands shaking on the stick. He landed 20 minutes later, Rosie trailing smoke from a punctured oil line. Frenchie and Morrison ran to the plane, their faces a mixture of relief and disbelief. "Sir, we heard the radio chatter," Morrison said. "The 37th says you killed 2 Panzers and damaged a 3rd. The German column turned back. They're retreating." Carpenter climbed out of the cockpit, his legs weak. He looked at Rosie. 16 bullet holes in the wings and fuselage, the oil line leaking, 1 bazooka mount bent from recoil. The plane looked like it had been through a shredder. 2 kills, he said quietly. "Not good enough. I missed with half my shots. The dive angle was wrong. The lead calculation was off. We need to adjust the mounting angle, improve the sighting system." "Sir, you just turned back a Panzer column with a Piper Cub," Frenchie said. "That's not good enough. That's a goddamn miracle." But Carpenter wasn't listening. He was already sketching modifications in his notebook, calculating angles, planning the next mission. He'd proven the concept worked. Now he needed to perfect it. Because the Germans wouldn't stay surprised for long. They'd adapt. They'd start looking up. And when they did, he needed to be faster, more accurate, more lethal. The schoolteacher had become a hunter, and the Panzers had become his prey. By November 1944, the German Wehrmacht's intelligence apparatus was in chaos. Reports flooding into headquarters from the Lorraine front described an impossible phenomenon. American observation aircraft, unarmed, fabric-covered Piper Cubs, were destroying Panzer tanks, not spotting them for artillery, not marking them for fighter bombers, destroying them directly with some kind of aerial rocket system that struck from above with devastating accuracy. Oberstleutnant Heinrich Vogel, Chief Intelligence Officer for Panzergruppe West, sat in his cramped headquarters in a requisitioned farmhouse reading the reports with growing incredulity. A history professor before the war, Vogel prided himself on rational analysis, on separating fact from the fog of combat exaggeration. But these reports were consistent across multiple units, multiple engagements, multiple witnesses. "It's impossible," he said to his aide, Hauptmann Klaus Richter. "The American L-4 Grasshopper has a maximum payload of perhaps 200 kilograms. It cannot carry anti-tank weapons. Its engine lacks the power. Its structure lacks the strength. This is panic, not intelligence." Richter placed another folder on the desk. "Sir, this is from Hauptmann Steiner, 21st Panzer Division. His company lost 3 tanks in 4 minutes to aerial rocket attack. He personally observed the attacking aircraft, a single-engine observation plane, American markings, firing rockets from wing-mounted tubes. He estimates the aircraft was flying at 150 kilometers per hour, attacking from 100 meters altitude." Vogel opened the folder, reading Steiner's meticulous report. Steiner was no fool, a veteran of North Africa and Normandy, a man who'd seen every weapon the Allies possessed. His description was detailed, technical, credible, and terrifying. "If this is true," Vogel said slowly, "it represents a fundamental shift in tactical doctrine. The Americans have weaponized their most vulnerable aircraft. They've turned reconnaissance into direct attack. It violates every principle of aerial warfare we've established. It violates physics, sir, Richter said. Our engineers say the recoil from such weapons would tear the wings off such a light aircraft. And yet the wings remain attached and our tanks burn. Vogel stood, walking to the map on the wall. Red pins marked reported attacks by the mysterious armed grasshoppers. 12 incidents in 3 weeks. 14 confirmed tank kills, 7 damaged. The attacks clustered around the 4th Armored Division's area of operations. There's a pattern. Most attacks occur in low visibility, clouds, fog, rain. The aircraft approaches from unexpected angles. It fires, then disappears into cloud cover before our flak can respond. It's using weather as camouflage. Our Panzer commanders are requesting air cover, Richter said. They want Luftwaffe fighters to patrol their advance routes. Vogel laughed bitterly. The Luftwaffe? We're lucky to see one of our own aircraft per week. The Americans own the sky. No, we must adapt our ground tactics. Order all Panzer units to maintain 360-degree observation, including overhead. Station men with Panzerfausts on every tank's engine deck when moving through contested areas. Increase flak coverage. And most importantly, he tapped the map. We must identify and eliminate this pilot. Because I believe it's one man. One pilot who's discovered a technique and is perfecting it. The Americans are not mass-producing these armed grasshoppers. This is improvisation, innovation by an individual. Find him, kill him. But finding Major Charles Carpenter was proving impossible. He flew alone, without wingmen. He attacked without warning, often in weather that grounded other aircraft. He never used the same approach twice, and he was getting better. On November 8th, Carpenter caught a column of 5 Panzers moving through morning fog near Chateau Salins. He dove from the grey overcast like a ghost, fired 2 rockets, and was gone before the Germans even identified the threat. 2 Panzers burned. The survivors reported being attacked by artillery from the sky because they never saw the aircraft. On November 12th, he found 3 Panzer IVs supporting an infantry attack near Morhange. He attacked from the sun, diving nearly vertical. Pulling out so low his wheels almost touched the lead tank's turret. 3 rockets fired, 2 hits, 1 Panzer destroyed, 1 immobilized. The 3rd fled, its commander reporting aerial mines, because he couldn't conceive of an aircraft that small, carrying anti-tank weapons. On November 15th, Carpenter achieved what would become his most famous kill. A Panther tank, the Wehrmacht's most feared medium tank, with frontal armor that could shrug off Sherman rounds like raindrops, was terrorizing American positions near Falkemont. The Panther had already destroyed 4 Shermans and was advancing on a field hospital. Carpenter found it through a gap in the clouds, dove through intense machine gun fire, and put both rockets through the Panther's thin top armor. The tank exploded so violently that debris landed 200 yards away. The field hospital's patients and staff watched in stunned silence as the tiny observation plane waggled its wings and disappeared back into the clouds. The legend of Bazooka Charlie was born. American troops began reporting Carpenter sightings like others reported Elvis. He was everywhere and nowhere, a guardian angel in canvas and steel. German troops began calling him der Heuschrecken Teufel, the grasshopper devil. Panzer crews, already stressed by constant Allied air superiority, now had to worry about attacks from the least likely source imaginable. But the strain was showing on Carpenter himself. He was flying 3, sometimes 4 missions per day, often in weather that grounded everyone else. His hands trembled when he wasn't flying. He'd lost 12 pounds. His eyes had developed a permanent squint from hours staring into clouds and sun. Lieutenant Morrison found him one evening sitting beside Rosie, just staring at the patched bullet holes in the wings. "Sir, you need rest," Morrison said gently. "You've flown 17 combat missions in 12 days. You're exhausted." "I'm effective," Carpenter corrected. "There's a difference. Every mission I fly, every tank I kill, that's American boys who don't die. That's families back home who don't get telegrams. I can rest when the war's over." "Sir, you're not invincible." Sooner or later, the Germans are going to get lucky. They're adapting. Intelligence says they're positioning more flak guns, training crews to watch for you specifically. Carpenter stood, running his hand along Rosie's propeller. Then I adapt faster. That's how you win wars, Lieutenant. Not by being stronger or having better equipment, by being smarter, by doing what the enemy thinks is impossible. He was right, but he was also pushing his luck to the breaking point. On November 18th, that luck nearly ran out. Carpenter was hunting near Sarre Union when he spotted a German supply column. Trucks, half-tracks, and 2 Panzer fires providing escort. He dove on the rear Panzer, fired both rockets. One hit, one missed. The Panzer stopped, smoking but not destroyed. Carpenter climbed to reposition for another attack. That's when the flak opened up. The Germans had positioned a 37mm flak gun on a half-track specifically to counter low-flying aircraft. The gun crew had been watching the clouds, waiting. When Carpenter emerged for his second dive, they were ready. The 37mm shells exploded around Rosie in black puffs of smoke and shrapnel. Carpenter felt the plane shudder, heard metal tearing. The engine coughed, lost power, then caught again. He aborted the attack, turning hard, diving for the deck. More flak followed him, the shells walking across the sky like deadly footsteps. One exploded close enough to blow out the side window. Shrapnel punched through the cockpit, missing Carpenter's head by inches. The instrument panel shattered. Oil sprayed across the windscreen. The engine was dying, the propeller windmilling uselessly. Carpenter was going down. He had perhaps 30 seconds to find a landing spot before Rosie became a coffin. Below was forest, roads, and German-occupied territory. He spotted a small field, barely 200 yards long, bordered by trees. It would have to do. He aimed for it, fighting the controls, the grasshopper gliding like a wounded bird. The landing was controlled chaos. Rosie hit hard, bounced, hit again. The landing gear collapsed. The plane skidded across the frozen ground, spinning, the wings tearing off against fence posts. Carpenter was thrown against his harness, his head slamming into the instrument panel. The world went grey, then black. He woke to silence. The engine was dead. Smoke filled the cockpit. His head throbbed. Blood ran down his face from a gash above his eye. He was alive, barely. He kicked open the door, fell out of the wreckage, crawled away. Behind him, Rosie was a broken mess of fabric and steel, the bazookas torn from their mounts, the propeller bent into a pretzel. She'd never fly again. Carpenter heard voices, German voices, shouting, coming closer. He was behind enemy lines, injured, alone. He drew his service pistol, checked the magazine. 8 rounds, not nearly enough. He ran for the tree line, his vision blurring, his legs weak. Behind him, German soldiers emerged from the forest, at least a dozen. They'd seen the crash. They were coming to capture or kill the pilot who'd been terrorizing their Panzers. Carpenter made it to the trees, collapsed behind a fallen log. He could hear the Germans spreading out, searching. He had maybe 2 minutes before they found him. He thought of his wife, Rosie, back in Illinois. He thought of his students. He thought of all the tanks he'd killed, all the American lives he'd saved. If this was the end, at least it had meant something. Then he heard a different sound, an American engine, a jeep crashing through the underbrush, voices shouting in English, gunfire. The Germans scattered. Strong hands grabbed Carpenter, pulled him up. "Got you, sir," a voice said. It was Sergeant Frenchy Duga, grinning like a madman, his rifle still smoking. "Heard your mayday. Figured you might need a ride home." They threw Carpenter in the jeep, drove like hell through German fire, made it back to American lines, with bullets chasing them all the way. Carpenter passed out in the jeep, woke up in a field hospital with a concussion, 17 stitches, and a Purple Heart he never asked for. Rosie was gone, but Bazooka, Charlie, wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. The field hospital at Nancy smelled of antiseptic, blood, and the peculiar metallic odor of men pushed beyond their limits. Major Charles Carpenter lay in a cot that was too short for his frame, his head wrapped in bandages that made him look like a mummy who'd lost a fight with a tank, which technically he had. The concussion had left him with double vision and a headache that felt like someone was using his skull for drum practice. The doctor said he needed 2 weeks of rest. Carpenter gave them 3 days before he walked out against medical advice. "Sir, you can barely stand straight," Lieutenant Morrison protested, following Carpenter across the muddy compound toward the maintenance depot. "You're seeing double. You can't fly like this." "I can fly better than most men can when they're healthy," Carpenter said, though he had to grab Morrison's shoulder to keep from falling when a wave of dizziness hit. "Besides, I'm not flying today, I'm building." Rosie was gone, destroyed in the crash near Sarre Union. But the 4th Armored Division had 3 other L-4 Grasshoppers in various states of repair. Carpenter had already claimed one, a plane that had taken flak damage over Metz and been written off as too expensive to fix properly. To Carpenter, it was perfect. A blank canvas. Sergeant Frenchy Dugas had assembled a team of mechanics, welders and scroungers, men who could build a tank from spare parts and wire if you gave them enough time and coffee. They'd heard about Bazooka Charlie's exploits. They'd seen the gun camera footage of Panzers exploding under rocket fire. They wanted in. "All right, Major," Frenchy said, gesturing to the damaged Grasshopper like a used car salesman showing off his best deal. "She's got a cracked engine mount, fabric tears on both wings, and the control cables are frayed. But the engine's solid, the frame's straight, and she's all yours if you want her." Carpenter walked around the plane, his trained eye cataloguing every flaw and possibility. "We're going to rebuild her from the ground up, not just repair, improve. Everything I learned from Rosie, every mistake, every close call, we're going to engineer out of this bird." Over the next week, Carpenter drove his team with the intensity of a man who knew that perfection was the difference between life and death. They worked 18-hour days in a freezing maintenance hangar, fueled by terrible coffee and the knowledge that every improvement they made would save American lives. The Bazooka mounts were redesigned. The original mounts had been crude, welded brackets that added unnecessary weight and created drag. The new mounts were streamlined, using aircraft-grade aluminum salvaged from a crashed P-47. They were lighter, stronger, and positioned to minimize the effect of rocket recoil on the aircraft's center of gravity. Carpenter increased the load to 6 bazookas, 3 per wing, but the improved design actually reduced total weight by 12 pounds. The firing system was completely overhauled. The original electrical system had been unreliable, with wires that corroded in the damp European weather and solenoids that sometimes failed to strike the rocket primers. The new system used waterproof connectors, redundant wiring, and improved solenoids tested to 500 cycles. Carpenter added a selector switch that allowed him to fire rockets individually, in pairs or in a full salvo, tactical flexibility that had been impossible before. The sighting system received the most attention. The original grease pencil mark on the windscreen had been crude, requiring Carpenter to estimate lead, angle, and distance by instinct. The new system incorporated a simple mechanical sight, essentially a modified gun sight from a .50 caliber machine gun mounted on the cockpit frame. It wasn't sophisticated, but it gave Carpenter a consistent reference point and basic ranging marks for different dive angles. But the most important modification was psychological, not mechanical. Carpenter had the new plane painted in a distinctive pattern, olive drab with bright yellow stripes on the tail and wingtips. It was the opposite of camouflage, a deliberate provocation. "Sir, you're making yourself a target," Morrison said, staring at the garish paint job. "Every German gunner in France is going to see you coming." "Exactly," Carpenter said. "I want them to see me. I want them to know I'm coming. Because by the time they react, I'll already be on them. Fear is a weapon, Lieutenant. The Germans are terrified of Allied air power. Now they're going to be terrified of a single Piper Cub. That's psychological warfare." He christened the new plane Rosie II in honor of her predecessor. On December 1st, 1944, with his double vision finally resolved and his headache reduced to a manageable throb, Carpenter took Rosie 2 up for her first combat mission. The target was a German armored column near Sarreguemines, 8 Panzer IVs and 2 Tigers, the latter being the most feared tanks in the Wehrmacht arsenal. Tigers were nearly invincible from the front, with armor thick enough to bounce American tank rounds like pebbles. But from above, their engine decks were vulnerable, protected by only 25 minutes of steel. Carpenter found the column moving through a valley, the Tigers leading, their commanders confident in their invulnerability. He climbed to 2,000 feet, positioning himself between the sun and the target. The new Rosie 2 handled better than the original, the improved weight distribution making her more responsive. He nosed into a dive, steeper than he'd ever attempted before, the airspeed indicator climbing past the red line. The lead Tiger grew in his windscreen. He could see the commander in the cupola, scanning the horizon for ground threats. The mechanical sight lined up perfectly on the Tiger's engine deck. Carpenter waited until the last possible moment, until he could see the individual rivets in the tank's armor, then fired a full salvo, all 6 rockets simultaneously. The recoil was tremendous, like being kicked by a mule. Rosie 2 shuddered, the nose pitching up violently, but the improved mounts held. The rockets streaked downward in a perfect spread. 4 missed, 2 hit. It was enough. Both rockets struck the Tiger's engine deck within inches of each other. The shaped charges punched through the armor, detonating inside the engine compartment. The Tiger's massive Maybach engine exploded, fuel and oil igniting in a fireball that blew the engine deck hatches off their hinges. The tank rolled to a stop, smoke pouring from every opening. The crew bailed out, their uniforms on fire. The second Tiger's commander, seeing his lead tank destroyed by an impossible threat from above, made a fatal mistake. He ordered his driver to stop and his gunner to traverse the turret, searching for the attacker. It took them 8 seconds to locate Carpenter's plane. 8 seconds was 7 seconds too long. Carpenter had already reloaded mentally, calculating his next attack even as he pulled out of the first dive. He came around in a tight circle, dove again, fired his remaining rockets at the stationary Tiger. 3 hits this time. The Tiger erupted like a volcano, the ammunition inside cooking off in a series of secondary explosions that tore the 60-ton tank apart from the inside. 2 Tigers destroyed in 90 seconds. The remaining Panzer IVs scattered like frightened sheep, their commanders abandoning the advance and retreating at maximum speed. Carpenter climbed back into the clouds, his hands shaking from adrenaline, his heart pounding. He'd just killed 2 of the most powerful tanks in the world with an aircraft that cost less than a single Tiger's main gun. When he landed, the entire maintenance crew was waiting. Word had spread via radio. Bazooka Charlie had killed 2 Tigers. The impossible had become routine. General Gaffey himself came to the airstrip, accompanied by a photographer and a reporter from Stars and Stripes. "Major Carpenter," Gaffey said, shaking his hand, "you've just made history. No other pilot in any air force has destroyed heavy tanks with an observation aircraft. I'm recommending you for the Distinguished Service Cross." Carpenter was uncomfortable with the attention. "Sir, I'm just doing my job. The real heroes are the boys on the ground, the ones facing these tanks with nothing but Shermans and guts." "Which is exactly why what you're doing matters," Gaffey said. "You're evening the odds. You're giving our tankers a fighting chance. And you're scaring the hell out of the Germans. Keep it up." Over the next 3 weeks, Carpenter flew 26 combat missions, destroying 9 more tanks and damaging 6 others. His tactics evolved with each engagement. He learned to attack from multiple angles in a single mission, confusing German flak crews. He learned to use terrain, diving along ridgelines, using valleys as cover, emerging at unexpected angles. He learned to read German formations, identifying command tanks by their antenna arrays, and targeting them first to disrupt coordination. But the Germans were learning too. Flak coverage increased. Panzer columns began traveling with dedicated anti-aircraft vehicles. Commanders kept their hatches closed, reducing visibility but increasing survival. The easy kills were over. Now every mission was a calculated risk, a chess match between Carpenter's innovation and German adaptation. On December 19, Carpenter faced his greatest challenge yet. Intelligence reported a massive German armored column assembling near Bitchy, at least 30 tanks, including 6 Tigers and 4 of the new Panther AOSF-G models. They were preparing for a major offensive, part of what would later be known as the Battle of the Bulge. If that column broke through, it could cut off the entire 4th Armored Division. Carpenter took off into a snowstorm, visibility near zero, the wind buffeting Rosie 2 like a toy. He flew by instruments and instinct, navigating through valleys he'd memorized from maps. He found the German column by following the sound of their engines, a deep rumble that carried through the storm. He attacked out of the snow like a ghost, diving on the lead Tiger, firing, climbing back into the white void before the Germans even knew he was there. One hit. The Tiger stopped, burning. He circled, attacked again, targeting a Panther. 2 hits. The Panther's ammunition exploded, the turret flipping through the air. For 40 minutes, Carpenter played a deadly game of hide-and-seek in the snowstorm, attacking, disappearing, reloading at a forward airstrip, returning for more. The Germans fired blindly into the storm, their tracers creating a deadly light show that Carpenter navigated by instinct and luck. By the time he was forced to return to base, out of ammunition, out of fuel, and nearly out of luck, he'd made 7 attack runs and destroyed 4 tanks. The German offensive stalled. Without their armored spearhead, the attack lost momentum. The 4th Armored Division held, and Bazooka Charlie had proven that one man in one small plane could change the course of a battle. But the cost was mounting. Rosie the Soon had taken 37 hits. Carpenter's hands shook so badly he could barely hold a coffee cup. He'd lost 8 pounds in 3 weeks. His eyes had a 1,000-yard stare that never quite went away. Lieutenant Morrison found him that night, sitting alone in the dark hangar, staring at Rosie the Soon's battle damage. "Sir, you can't keep this up," Morrison said quietly. "You're going to get yourself killed." Carpenter didn't look at him. "Maybe, but until then, I'm going to kill as many of their tanks as I can. Because that's the job, that's the mission, and I'm the only one who can do it." He was right, and that was the tragedy. Because being irreplaceable meant he could never stop, never rest, never step back. The war had found the perfect weapon in Charles Carpenter, and weapons don't get to choose when they're used. By January 1945, the name Bazooka Charlie had transcended military circles and entered the realm of legend. American newspapers ran stories about the schoolteacher-turned-tank killer. Radio broadcasts described his exploits to audiences back home hungry for heroes. Soldiers painted crude images of grasshoppers with rockets on their helmets and tanks. He'd become a symbol, proof that American ingenuity and courage could overcome any obstacle, no matter how impossible. But in the frozen forests of eastern France, where the Battle of the Bulge had ground into a brutal stalemate, Major Charles Carpenter was simply exhausted. He'd flown 43 combat missions since December 1st. He'd destroyed 14 German tanks, a number that would have been impressive for an entire fighter squadron, let alone a single observation pilot in an unarmed aircraft. His official tally included 2 Tigers, 4 Panthers, and 8 Panzer IVs. Unofficially, he damaged or forced the abandonment of at least a dozen more. The Germans knew his name now. Intercepted radio communications revealed that Panzer commanders had standing orders to watch for the yellow-striped grasshopper and to engage it with all available weapons. A bounty had been placed on his head, 10,000 Reichsmarks, for the pilot who shot down Bazooka Charlie. It was the kind of attention that got men killed. On January 14, 1945, Carpenter received intelligence that would lead to his most significant engagement. A German armored battle group, Kampfgruppe Steiner, named for its commander, was assembling near Hatten-Rittershofen for a desperate counterattack. The battle group included 12 tanks, among them 3 of the massive Tiger II King Tigers, the most powerful tanks in the world. Each King Tiger weighed 70 tons, mounted an 88mm gun that could destroy any Allied tank at 2,000 yards, and had frontal armor so thick that even American tank destroyers were useless against it. The King Tigers were heading straight for the 14th Armored Division's positions. If they broke through, they'd roll up the entire American line. The 14th had already lost 23 Shermans trying to stop them. Desperation was setting in. "Sir, this is suicide," Lieutenant Morrison said, looking at the intelligence photos of the King Tigers. "These aren't Panzer fees. These are monsters. Their top armor is 40mm thick, twice what you've been hitting. Your bazookas might not even penetrate." Carpenter studied the photos with the analytical eye of a history teacher examining primary sources. The armor's thicker, but it's still just steel. The M9 bazooka can penetrate 4 inches at close range. 40mm is 1.6 inches. It'll go through if I hit it right. Straight down, perpendicular impact. The problem is getting close enough without being shot down. The problem is, there are 3 of them, and they'll all be shooting at you, Morrison countered. "Sir, you've done enough. You've proven the concept. Let someone else—" "There is no one else," Carpenter interrupted quietly. "I'm the only pilot in the entire European theater who's done this. I'm the only one who knows how. If I don't stop those King Tigers, American boys die. It's that simple." He took off at dawn on January 15th, the sky a pale grey that promised snow. Rosie II had been patched and repaired so many times, she was more scar tissue than original aircraft. The mechanics had done their best, but she was tired, her engine running rough, her fabric skin stretched and worn. Like her pilot, she was being held together by willpower and determination. Carpenter found Kampfgruppe Steiner moving through a valley near Hatten, the 3 King Tigers leading like prehistoric beasts, their massive guns traversing slowly, searching for threats. Behind them came Panzer fees and half-tracks filled with infantry. It was a formidable force, moving with the confidence of men who believed themselves invincible. Carpenter climbed to 3,000 feet, higher than he usually operated, using the altitude to study the formation and plan his attack. The King Tigers were spread out, perhaps 200 yards between each tank. Good tactical spacing that prevented a single artillery strike from hitting multiple targets. But it also meant Carpenter would have to attack each one individually, giving the others time to react. He selected his first target, the lead King Tiger, its commander standing in the cupola, binoculars raised, scanning the horizon. Carpenter nosed Rosie II into a dive, steeper and faster than he'd ever attempted. The airspeed indicator climbed past 120 mpb, past 130, the fabric wings beginning to flutter with the strain. The King Tiger grew in his windscreen, massive, intimidating, seemingly indestructible. At 500 feet, the German commander spotted him. Carpenter saw the man's face change from boredom to shock to fear in the space of a heartbeat. The commander dropped into the turret, shouting orders. The King Tiger's machine guns opened up, tracers arcing toward Rosie II in deadly streams. Carpenter ignored the fire, focused entirely on his sight picture. The mechanical sight lined up on the King Tiger's engine deck. 300 feet, 200 feet. He could see the individual bolts holding the armor plates together. He fired all 6 rockets in a single salvo. The recoil nearly tore the wings off. Rosie II pitched up violently, the engine screaming in protest. Carpenter fought the controls, pulling out of the dive so low that his wheels actually touched the King Tiger's turret, the impact jarring his teeth. Behind him, 4 rockets hit. The King Tiger's engine deck erupted in a series of explosions. The shaped charges punched through the 40mm armor, detonating inside the engine compartment and crew space. The massive tank shuddered, stopped, then began to burn. Smoke poured from every hatch. The crew tried to bail out, but the internal fires were too intense. The King Tiger became a steel coffin. Carpenter climbed away, his hands shaking, his vision blurred from the G-forces. One down, two to go. But now the entire German column knew he was there. Every gun was tracking him, every commander was shouting warnings. The element of surprise was gone. The second King Tiger's commander was smarter. Instead of stopping to engage, he kept moving, weaving the massive tank back and forth, making himself a harder target. He also positioned his tank near a cluster of half-tracks, using them as human shields, knowing Carpenter wouldn't risk hitting friendly infantry if any Americans were nearby. Carpenter circled, looking for an opening, burning precious fuel. The King Tiger kept moving, kept weaving. Minutes passed. Then Carpenter saw his chance. The King Tiger had to slow to navigate a narrow bridge. For perhaps 10 seconds, it would be stationary, exposed. He dove immediately, committing to the attack before he'd fully calculated the angles. It was instinct, not planning. The King Tiger was crossing the bridge when Carpenter fired. 2 rockets hit the turret roof, penetrating the thinner armor there. The King Tiger stopped on the bridge, blocking it, smoke pouring from the hatches. The crew bailed out, jumping into the freezing river below. 2 down, 1 to go. But Carpenter was out of rockets, and the third, King Tiger, was very much aware of him. He flew back to the forward airstrip at Haguenau, landing with his fuel gauge reading empty. The ground crew swarmed Rosie the 2, reloading rockets, patching new bullet holes, refueling. Carpenter didn't even get out of the cockpit. He drank water from a canteen someone handed him, ate a chocolate bar, and waited. "Sir, you need to rest," Frenchy said, seeing the exhaustion in Carpenter's eyes. "You're dead on your feet. Let someone else." "There is no one else," Carpenter repeated. "Reload the rockets. I'm going back." He took off. 15 minutes later, flying back toward Hatton. The German column had stopped, the remaining King Tiger and its escorts forming a defensive position. They were waiting for him. They knew he'd come back. It was a trap. Carpenter approached from the east, using the low winter sun as cover. The Germans were watching the west, expecting him to attack from the same direction as before. He dove out of the sun, the oldest trick in aviation, and fired at the King Tiger from a nearly vertical angle. 5 rockets hit. The King Tiger's turret roof collapsed inward, the shaped charges detonating inside the fighting compartment. The ammunition stored in the turret exploded, the blast so powerful it lifted the 70-ton tank off the ground. When it came down, it was a burning wreck, its crew dead before they knew what hit them. Carpenter pulled out of the dive, climbed away, and headed for home. Behind him, Kampfgruppe Steiner was in chaos, its armored spearhead destroyed, its advance halted. The 14th Armored Division would hold. The German counterattack had failed. When Carpenter landed, he could barely climb out of the cockpit. His legs gave out, and he collapsed on the tarmac. Medics rushed to him, but he waved them off. "I'm fine," he said, though he clearly wasn't. "Just tired." General Gaffey was there, along with a crowd of soldiers, mechanics and officers. They'd been listening to the radio chatter, hearing the reports of the King Tigers being destroyed. When Carpenter stood, they erupted in cheers. "Major Carpenter," Gaffey said, his voice thick with emotion, "you just destroyed 3 King Tigers. Do you understand what that means? Those tanks were supposed to be invincible. You killed them with a Piper Cub. You've changed warfare itself." Carpenter looked at Rosie too, at the bullet holes and patches, at the bent propeller and scorched paint. "I just did my job, sir, that's all." But it was more than a job. It was a statement, a declaration that courage and innovation could overcome any advantage, any weapon, any enemy. The Germans had built the most powerful tanks in history, and an American school teacher had destroyed them with an aircraft that cost less than a single tank's ammunition load. In Berlin, Oberstleutnant Vogel read the reports of Kampfgruppe Steiner's destruction with a sense of resignation. He'd spent months trying to counter Bazooka Charlie, and every countermeasure had failed. The Americans had found their weapon, and it was unstoppable. "We cannot defeat him," Vogel told his staff. "He is too unpredictable, too skilled, too willing to take risks that no rational pilot would accept. Our only hope is that he makes a mistake, or that luck finally abandons him. But luck, it seemed, was on Carpenter's side, and the war was entering its final months. The question wasn't whether Germany would lose, but how many more Panzers Bazooka Charlie would destroy before it ended. The war in Europe ended on May 8, 1945, with Germany's unconditional surrender. By then, Major Charles Bazooka Charlie Carpenter had flown 72 combat missions, destroyed 14 confirmed tanks, including 2 Tigers and 3 King Tigers, damaged or forced the abandonment of 17 more, and fundamentally altered the doctrine of aerial warfare. He'd done it all in an aircraft that was never designed for combat, using weapons that were never meant to be fired from the air, employing tactics that violated every established principle of military aviation. He'd also survived, which was perhaps the most remarkable achievement of all. Of the 47 L-4 Grasshopper pilots who'd been flying artillery spotting missions when Carpenter began his experiment in October 1944, only 19 were still alive by war's end. The casualty rate for observation pilots was 58%, higher than bomber crews, higher than fighter pilots, higher than almost any other role in the Army Air Forces. Carpenter had not only survived, but thrived, becoming the most effective tank killer in the European theater, despite flying the slowest, most vulnerable aircraft in the sky. When Carpenter returned to the United States in June 1945, he was a celebrity. Newspapers ran front-page stories about the schoolteacher who'd become a tank killer. Newsreels showed footage of Rosie the Tow, her yellow stripes and rocket tubes, making her instantly recognizable. He was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross, the Silver Star, the Distinguished Flying Cross, and the Air Medal with 12 oak leaf clusters. General Eisenhower personally shook his hand and called him one of the most innovative warriors in the European campaign. But Carpenter was uncomfortable with the attention. At the awards ceremony in Washington, D.C., and when asked to give a speech, he kept it brief. "I was just a teacher who learned a new lesson that courage and creativity matter more than size or strength. The real heroes are the boys who fought on the ground, who faced those tanks with nothing but rifles and determination. I just gave them a little help from above." He returned to Moline, Illinois, to his wife Rosie, the real one, not the aircraft, and to his job teaching history at Moline High School. His students were fascinated by his war stories, but Carpenter rarely spoke about them. When pressed, he'd say only, "War is a terrible thing. I'm glad I could help end it a little sooner. Now let's talk about the Treaty of Westphalia." Rosie II was retired from service and eventually donated to the Illinois Aviation Museum, where she remains on display today. Her yellow stripes faded, but her rocket tubes still mounted, a testament to American ingenuity and one man's refusal to accept limitations. The impact of Carpenter's innovation extended far beyond his personal achievements. His success with armed observation aircraft led to the development of dedicated ground attack helicopters in later conflicts. The AH-1 Cobra in Vietnam, the AH-64 Apache in Desert Storm, the modern attack helicopters that dominate battlefields today, all trace their conceptual lineage back to a schoolteacher who mounted bazookas on a Piper Cub and proved that small, maneuverable aircraft could destroy heavy armor. Military historians have analyzed Carpenter's tactics extensively. His use of weather as camouflage, his exploitation of enemy blind spots, attacking from above where tanks were most vulnerable, his willingness to take calculated risks, and his constant adaptation to enemy countermeasures have all become case studies in military innovation. The U.S. Army's Command and General Staff College uses Carpenter's story to teach officers about the importance of creative thinking and the value of challenging established doctrine. But perhaps the most significant impact was psychological. Carpenter's success demonstrated that technological superiority could be overcome by tactical innovation. The Germans had better tanks, better armor, better guns, but they lost to an enemy who refused to fight on German terms, who found vulnerabilities where none were supposed to exist, who turned weaknesses into strengths. In 1984, On the 40th anniversary of his first tank kill, Carpenter was interviewed by a military historian. He was 72 years old, retired from teaching, still living in Moline. The historian asked him what he thought his legacy was. Carpenter was silent for a long moment, looking out the window at the Illinois prairie. "I think," he said finally, "that I proved something important, that one person with courage and creativity can make a difference, that you don't need to be the biggest or the strongest or the best equipped. You just need to be willing to try something no one else has tried, to see possibilities where others see only limitations." He paused, then smiled. "And I think I proved that teachers can be warriors too. We fight with ideas instead of weapons. But sometimes, when necessary, we can do both." Charles Carpenter died in 1987 at the age of 75. His funeral was attended by veterans from the 4th Armored Division, by former students, by military historians, and by a delegation from the German Bundeswehr, who came to pay respects to a worthy adversary. A restored L-4 Grasshopper flew overhead during the service, trailing smoke in the missing man formation. His gravestone in Moline's Riverside Cemetery is simple. Charles Carpenter, 1912 to 1987. Teacher, pilot, innovator, he taught us that courage has no size limit. But his real memorial is in the sky, in every helicopter gunship that dives on enemy armor, in every pilot who refuses to accept that something is impossible, in every person who looks at a problem and thinks there has to be a better way. The Germans called him der Heuschrecken Teufel, the grasshopper devil. His fellow Americans called him Bazooka Charlie. History calls him a pioneer. But Charles Carpenter would have been content with the simplest description. A teacher who learned that the best lessons are sometimes taught at 300 feet, diving through flak with 6 rockets and a prayer. The Panzers learned that lesson the hard way, and they never forgot it. The story of Bazooka Charlie reminds us that innovation and courage can overcome any obstacle, no matter how impossible it seems. One man, one small plane, and one revolutionary idea changed the course of battles and saved countless lives. If this story of ingenuity and determination inspired you, please subscribe to our channel for more untold stories from World War II. Share this video with anyone who needs a reminder that size doesn't determine impact, courage and creativity do. And leave a comment below. What other unsung heroes of World War II should we explore? Your suggestions help us bring these incredible stories to light. Thank you for watching, and remember, sometimes the smallest warriors cast the longest shadows.